An old woman is humiliated by a simple woman in a restaurant, but didn't know she was the new owner. "Go back to the nursing home where you belong, old woman," shouted the elegant woman as she threw water in the face of the simply dressed elderly lady. But no one in the crowded restaurant could imagine that the humiliated woman had just purchased the entire establishment, including the floor beneath her aggressor's expensive shoes. Subscribe if this story finds you and let me know where in the world you're watching from. The Bellissimo, one of Chicago's most prestigious restaurants, was particularly busy that Thursday evening. Soft lights illuminated the subtly elegant decor, while the aroma of Italian dishes prepared with imported ingredients hung in the air. Helena Monroe, a 72-year-old woman, waited patiently near the reception. She was dressed simply, a navy blue cotton pants and blouse ensemble, a beige wool coat that had seen better days, in practical shoes. Her only adornment, a small silver butterfly brooch, was discreetly pinned to her lapel. Her gray hair was tied in a simple bun, and on her wrist, an antique watch precisely marked 8 o'clock in the evening. "Table for one?" Helena asked the receptionist, who was frantically typing on her tablet without raising her eyes. "We have a 2-hour waiting list," the young woman responded automatically. "But I can recommend another less busy establishment nearby." Helena smiled peacefully. "I'll wait, if you don't mind." The receptionist finally looked up, examining the elderly woman from head to toe with poorly disguised assessment. "As you wish, but I should warn you that our menu starts at $60 per person, drinks not included." "I understand perfectly," replied Helena, calmly taking a seat in the waiting area. An hour passed. Helena observed the movement with genuine curiosity. She noticed details that many would ignore: the subtle wear on the wooden floor near the entrance, the almost imperceptible stain on the ceiling above the kitchen, the way some waiters avoided a certain area near the bar. While she waited, several groups were called ahead of her, including couples who had visibly arrived after her. Helena did not protest, just continued her patient observation. "We shouldn't have come without a reservation," commented a nearby elegantly dressed woman. "This place is impossible on Thursdays." Helena smiled gently at her. "They say the food makes up for the wait." The woman examined Helena with a look from top to bottom. "Yes, but it's quite expensive. Perhaps the bistro on the corner would be more suitable for—" She gestured vaguely in Helena's direction, leaving the sentence incomplete, but her meaning was clear. "Thank you for the suggestion," Helena responded politely, showing no offense. Around 9:30, the receptionist called a name that wasn't Helena's, although the elderly woman was clearly next on the waiting list. When Helena gently pointed out the fact, the receptionist smiled with false sweetness. "There must be some mistake. I'm sure there are still several people ahead of you." After another half hour, the restaurant began to empty slightly. Helena approached the reception again. "I believe there must be some table available now," she said firmly, although her tone remained courteous. The receptionist sighed dramatically. "We have a small table near the kitchen. It's the only one available at the moment. It will serve perfectly, thank you." A novice waiter, who seemed to be on his first day, was assigned to accompany her. The young man, no more than 20 years old, led Helena to a cramped table, practically against the kitchen door. The noise of pots and the loud voices of the cooks were constant. "Sorry about the location," murmured the young waiter, visibly embarrassed. "Don't worry," Helena replied kindly. "I've worked in restaurants. I know how it is." That information seemed to relax the young man. "I'll bring the menu." He returned moments later with a printed menu and a glass of water. "My name is Michael. Please call me when you're ready to order." Helena examined the menu with professional attention, noting every detail from the choice of ingredients to the price structure. While doing so, she observed the workflow in the dining room. the more experienced waiters attending the best tables, the sommelier purposely ignoring her section, the hurried busboys in the tense interaction between the kitchen staff and the servers. From her discreet position, Helena had a privileged view of the restaurant's central table, clearly the best location in the room. There, a group of 4 women dined animatedly, all impeccably dressed and appearing to be regulars at the establishment. One of them, with perfectly arranged brown hair and a designer red dress, seemed to be the center of attention, not just at her table, but for much of the staff. The restaurant manager visited her table frequently, exchanging smiles and familiar comments. "Mrs. Diane, how is the risotto tonight?" he asked with exaggerated deference. "Acceptable, Marcus, although I would prefer a bit more saffron," replied the woman with an air of unquestionable authority. "I will inform the chef immediately," assured the manager, bowing slightly. Helena observed the scene with interest, as young Michael returned to her table. "Have you decided, ma'am?" "Yes, I would like the penne alla vodka and a glass of Chianti, please." Michael noted the order. "Excellent choice." And then, lowering his voice, he explained, "The penne is one of the simplest dishes, but honestly, it's one of the best. Chef Antonio has a special recipe for the sauce." "Thank you for the tip," smiled Helena. "That's Diane Harrison, isn't it? The food critic." Michael's eyes widened. "Yes. How do you know?" "She comes here every Thursday, always at the same table. The restaurant practically stops when she arrives." "I recognize her from her photos in the newspapers," Helena replied simply. While waiting for her order, Helena took a small notebook from her purse and began to make discreet notes. Occasionally, she looked around, recording her observations with a black ink pen. At the central table, the conversation was becoming increasingly animated, the voices louder as the wine bottles emptied. Diane Harrison gestured expansively, clearly dominating the conversation. "And then I told the owner that if he expected a good review at that service, he was completely mistaken. The establishment closed in less than 3 months." The women laughed loudly, attracting glances from other tables. Helena continued her notes, now sketching a small diagram of the restaurant's layout. Michael returned with the plate of penne and the glass of wine. "Here you are, ma'am. I hope you enjoy it." Helena tasted the pasta with genuine appreciation. "Delicious. The sauce has a perfect balance." Diane Harrison's table became even noisier. One of the women discreetly pointed in Helena's direction. "Look, do we have a health inspector in disguise?" she commented, loud enough to be heard at nearby tables. Diane turned to observe Helena, who continued to make notes while eating. "Or perhaps she's writing her will," responded Diane, provoking more laughter. Helena continued her meal, apparently absorbed in her thoughts and oblivious to the comments. This seemed to irritate Diane even more, who wasn't accustomed to being ignored. "Marcus," called Diane with an imperious gesture. The manager approached immediately. "Who is that lady near the kitchen who keeps writing? Is she a competing critic?" The manager looked in the indicated direction, frowning. "I don't recognize her, Mrs. Harrison. Shall I check?" "Please, and bring another bottle of Brunello." Marcus approached Helena's table with a tense smile. "Is everything in order with your meal, ma'am?" "Perfectly adequate, thank you," replied Helena. "I noticed that you're making some notes," he insinuated, trying to peek at the notebook. Helena calmly closed the notebook. "Just some personal observations." "I see," replied the manager, clearly unconvinced. "Are you a food critic?" "Just a lady enjoying dinner alone," replied Helena with an enigmatic smile. The manager returned to Diane's table, who observed the scene with undisguised interest. "She denied being a critic, but she's definitely noting something," he reported. Diane Harrison suddenly stood up. "I'll find out myself." With determined steps, Diane crossed the restaurant toward Helena's table, followed by the curious glances of other patrons. Her red dress seemed even more vibrant under the directed lights, and she displayed the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling any environment she was in. "Good evening," she said, positioning herself beside Helena's table. "I am Diane Harrison, food critic for the Tribune. I noticed that you're making quite detailed notes." Helena looked up with tranquility. "Good evening, Mrs. Harrison. I'm just organizing some thoughts. About the restaurant, I presume?" "Among other things." Diane narrowed her eyes. "You know, it's considered unethical for critics not to identify themselves when evaluating an establishment." "I'm not a critic, Mrs. Harrison." "Then why the meticulous notes? Why draw the layout? Why record every detail of the service?" Diane pointed to the now closed note. "I have an interest in restaurants," replied Helena simply. Diane's expression hardened. "Look, I've been through this before. Amateur critics trying to steal my territory. Which irrelevant blog or website publishes your opinions?" "None," replied Helena, calmly taking a sip of her wine. "I don't believe you," declared Diane, leaning over the table. "You know what I think? I think you're just a lonely old woman trying to feel important in a restaurant that's clearly above your level." The restaurant had gone silent. All eyes now turned to the confrontation. Michael, the young waiter, looked mortified, while the manager observed from a distance, undecided about intervening. "If you'll excuse me, I would like to finish my meal," said Helena, with dignity. Something in Helena's unwavering calm seemed to further enrage Diane. With a sudden movement, she picked up Helena's water glass. "Want to know what I think about amateur critics who don't know their place?" And before anyone could react, Diane threw the water in Helena's face. Icy drops ran down the elderly woman's wrinkled face, wetting her coat and the pen as she had not yet finished. A stunned silence fell over the restaurant. Michael rushed with napkins, while the manager finally reacted, quickly approaching. Helena remained completely still for a moment, water dripping from her face onto the table. Then, with deliberate movements, she took a napkin and calmly dried herself. "I suppose that concludes our conversation, Mrs. Harrison," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. Diane, now aware that she had gone too far in front of dozens of witnesses, attempted a forced laugh. "I just wanted to show what happens to intruders in this establishment." The manager finally intervened. "Mrs. Harrison, with all due respect—" "It's fine, Marcus," interrupted Diane with arrogance. "This lady was just leaving, wasn't she?" Helena looked directly into Diane's eyes. "Actually, no. But you are." Diane laughed. "Excuse me, I think the shock has affected your faculties, ma'am. This is practically my restaurant. I've been coming here every week for years." "I understand your confusion," replied Helena, still calmly drying herself. Then, addressing the manager, "Marcus, could you call Mr. Vizzini, please? I believe he should be in the kitchen." The manager blinked, confused. "How do you know the owner?" "Please, just call him." Intrigued, Marcus headed to the kitchen. Minutes later, a middle-aged man in a chef's apron emerged, his face red from the heat of the ovens. "What's going on? We're in the middle of service, and—" His words died as he saw Helena. "Signora Helena, we weren't expecting you tonight." Diane looked from the chef to Helena, her face revealing growing confusion. Helena smiled at the chef. "Hello, Antonio. I didn't want to announce my visit. I preferred to observe normal operations." Antonio hurried to Helena, genuinely distressed to see her condition. "My God, what happened? Marcus, why is the signora wet?" "There was a small incident," replied Helena before the manager could speak. "Mrs. Harrison was just demonstrating her opinion about amateur critics." Antonio paled. "Mrs. Harrison, what have you done?" Diane, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to maintain her posture. "Just a joke between colleagues in the profession. I didn't know she was your friend, Antonio." Helena removed an envelope from her purse, miraculously dry. I'm not just a friend, Mrs. Harrison. Since yesterday I am the owner of this establishment. A murmur ran through the restaurant as Helena handed the documents to the stunned manager. As you may know, Mr. Vizzini is retiring, Helena explained calmly. We had been negotiating the sale of Bellissimo for a few months, and we finalized the transaction yesterday. Antonio nodded, confirming. Signora Helena is the new owner, yes. It was to be announced next week, after finalizing some details. This is absurd, protested Diane, although her tone no longer carried the same confidence. You can barely afford a meal here, let alone buy the establishment. Helena smiled serenely. Appearances can be deceiving, can't they? The manager examined the documents with increasing paleness. These papers appear to be in order. Mrs. Monroe is, in fact, the new owner. Deanne Harrison looked as if she had been struck by lightning. Her face alternated between red with shame and white with shock. I had no way of knowing, she stammered. Certainly not, agreed Helena. After all, you judged me only by my appearance, not by my ability or character. The entire restaurant was in absolute silence, every customer and employee absorbing the extraordinary turn of events. Allow me to clarify a few things, said Helena, now addressing not just Diane but everyone present. Before retiring, I owned a chain of restaurants on the West Coast. I started as a dishwasher at 18 and worked in every possible position. Waitress, cook, manager before opening my first establishment. Antonio smiled with pride. Signora Helena is a legend in the business. Her group, Monroe Hospitality, is a reference in gastronomic excellence. After selling my chain to a larger conglomerate, I intended to enjoy my retirement, continued Helena. But when my old friend Antonio mentioned he was retiring and looking for someone who would preserve the essence of Bellissimo, I couldn't resist one last project. Young Michael, who observed everything with wide eyes, approached timidly. Are you Helena Monroe? From Monroe Hospitality? I read about you in hospitality school. Helena smiled warmly at the young man. Yes, that's me. And I must say, Michael, that your service tonight was impeccable, despite the challenging circumstances. Diane Harrison, now completely stripped of her former arrogance, seemed diminished in her red dress. Mrs. Monroe, I apologize for my inexcusable behavior, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I don't know what to say. Sometimes there isn't much to say, replied Helena. Sometimes we just need to learn. Helena turned to the manager. Marcus, please escort Mrs. Harrison and her friends to the exit. Their bill is settled. But, began Diane, if you wish to write a negative review about this experience, feel free, continued Helena calmly. However, I should inform you that I'm recording this conversation, and any description that doesn't correspond to the events witnessed by everyone here would be problematic. Marcus, recovering his professional composure, approached Diane. This way, ma'am. As Diane and her friends were escorted out, Helena addressed the kitchen. Antonio, could you prepare your special penny again? Mine got a little wet. The restaurant transformed completely in the minutes that followed. Antonio insisted on personally preparing a new dish for Helena, while the manager reorganized the staff to properly serve the new owner. Please, no special treatment, Helena gently protested. I came here to observe normal operations, not to interrupt them. But the change in dynamics was palpable. Employees who had barely noticed her presence before now strived to demonstrate their competence. Customers at nearby tables smiled and waved, some even trying to initiate conversations. Helena returned to her notes, now without the need for discretion. Michael, encouraged by the previous recognition, approached again. Mrs. Monroe, I've always dreamed of working in one of your restaurants. I'm in my second year of hospitality school and you're doing an excellent job with your practical training. completed Helena. See me tomorrow at 10. I'd like to discuss the possibility of a supervised internship program. The young man's face lit up. Thank you very much, ma'am. You won't regret it. With the restaurant gradually returning to normal, Helena enjoyed her newly prepared dinner. Antonio joined her during a brief break from the kitchen. I wasn't planning to reveal my purchase this way, admitted Helena. I wanted to observe everything incognito for a few weeks. Sometimes, destiny has other plans, philosophized Antonio. What did you think of our little establishment? Helena consulted her notes. The food is exceptional, as always. The atmosphere is welcoming and elegant, but there are significant problems with the service and team culture. Antonio sighed. I know. In recent years, the pressure to please critics like Diane Harrison has distorted our priorities. We need to reorient the mission, affirmed Helena. This restaurant should not exist to satisfy egos, but to celebrate good food and provide memorable moments for all customers, regardless of who they are or what they wear. Like in the old days, Antonio smiled nostalgically. Exactly, agreed Helena. And we can start by eliminating that horrible selective waiting list at reception. When Helena finally left the restaurant, it was past midnight. The kitchen was closed, and only a few employees remained, cleaning and organizing everything for the next day. On the sidewalk, while waiting for her taxi, Helena spotted a familiar figure approaching hesitantly. Diane Harrison, Mrs. Monroe, called Diane. I know I don't deserve your time, but I needed to speak with you again. Helena studied the woman's face for a moment. I'm listening. What happened tonight? My behavior. I have no excuses, began Diane, visibly struggling with words. I spent the last hour sitting in my car, reflecting on the person I've become. Self-reflection can be painful, commented Helena. I wasn't always like this, continued Diane. When I started as a critic, I was passionate about food, about authentic experiences. At some point, everything transformed into power and influence. And now? Now I realize that I've become exactly the type of person I despised when I started, admitted Diane. Arrogant, elitist, cruel. A taxi stopped by the curb. Helena opened the door, but before getting in, she turned to Diane. The restaurant reopens at 5 for dinner service tomorrow. I'll be here at 3 for a meeting with the staff. If you're genuinely interested in rediscovering your original passion for gastronomy, show up at 4. Perhaps we'll have something to discuss. Diane blinked, surprised. After what I did, Helena smiled gently. You know, throughout my life, I discovered something important about restaurants and people. Both have potential for transformation, as long as someone is willing to invest the necessary effort. And with those words, Helena entered the taxi, leaving behind a transformed restaurant and a critic in existential crisis, both for the better. As the vehicle moved away through the streets of Chicago, she opened her notebook again, adding a final note. Reminder, order a new plaque for the entrance. Bellissimo, where everyone is treated like a VIP. The elderly woman smiled to herself. Her retirement would have to wait a little longer. There was work to be done, people to guide, and a culture to transform. And Helena Monroe, the dishwasher who built a gastronomic empire, was more than ready for her final chapter. If you've come this far and this story has touched your heart, I invite you to keep this faith alive with us by subscribing to the channel and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any stories that touch the soul. And if this story has moved you, give it a like so we can continue sharing more stories like this one, made with all our hearts. Until next